Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. It's been about 6 or 7 months now since I purchased my first Fuji camera, the X-E1, and spoiler alert, about an hour since I've had the X Pro one in my possession. And I thought now was probably a good time as any to kind of talk through my kind of workflow for dealing with the images that come out of these kind of original X-Trans1 sensor cameras. And I'd love to be able to say that I've found a consistent method that works for every image out of these cameras, but I just haven't been able to find that. Another good reason is why now is a good time to talk about the different kind of software that you can use, or that I use, is that one of them, Iridient X Transformer, has just released a new version of their kind of standalone program or plugin to convert the RAF files that come out of these Fuji cameras. So let's get started. So this video is going to be a little bit of me talking to you like this, and then also as well I'm going to be using Lightroom comparison just to kind of show you the kind of the differences in all the kind of the software that I've tried to use over the last few months to get the best out of these cameras and the images that they produce. Fundamentally, the reason why I bought these cameras in the first place was because they were supposed to produce some really magical out of camera JPEGs where you didn't really have to do a lot to them in post, if anything. And that is very true. But on the rare occasion I do want to push those files a little bit further, I've struggled, I think, probably a lot of Fuji users have struggled to try and find the best kind of solution to extracting all that kind of information from the Fuji cameras, while also crucially retaining the kind of the special aspect of those kind of JPEGs. And I haven't really found a solution for that. All I'm going to talk about today is how I've kind of accepted a different kind of look to an image in order to kind of then be able to work a little bit on it in post-production to kind of push the images to where you want the image to go in terms of your artistic process, or whether, like for me for instance, I quite like converting images to black and white, so it's nice to start with a kind of a baseline raw file which is close to the original, but then allows you then to take it on to where you want it to go. So the first option I try for most of the time is the JPEG straight out of camera, and I'm happy it has some latitude in that kind of JPEG to do minor kind of edits. So we're talking here about kind of a little bit of exposure, kind of compensation, a little bit of work in the highlight shadows, a little bit of sharpening if needed, a bit of clarity, and also a bit of cropping and kind of leveling the image to get it how you want it to be. And a little bit of that work in post is absolutely fine on those kind of original JPEGs, but then if you need to do a bit more work, I possibly would suggest using the camera's excellent in-camera kind of raw conversion software first to see whether you can kind of get the image closer to what you kind of are looking for. Yeah, so that's just an example of what the kind of the in-camera raw converter kind of menu looks like, and you can see from that there's quite a number of options on that page that you can kind of actually change. There's some more options as well. If I just scroll down, they go on to the next page. So as you can see from that, there's quite a lot you can do to a raw file in the camera, and then when you finish that process, you could just go to kind of press the Q button, press to create the kind of the image, and then if you're happy with it, press OK, and it will save it as a new kind of JPEG. So that will give you a kind of a different look to the one that the camera originally kind of created, and then you can choose between the two, do some more minor editing if you need to on post in Lightroom or whatever software you use, and you're done. So that's options 1 and 2. So obviously option 1 just worked with the original JPEG, minor post-processing. Option 2 is the in-camera raw editor, and then again you can then apply some more minor edits in Lightroom. But say you want to do a bit more kind of drastic changes to an image, you want to kind of convert it to monochrome in programs like Silver Effects Pro, then you're going to want to kind of get a file out of the camera that you can work with in post-production if you so desire. And that is where I have kind of struggled since owning these cameras. Yeah, so the RAW processors that I've tried is RAW Therapy, which didn't work so well, and Lightroom 5.7, which supports both of my Fuji cameras that I've got, but again, I don't really rate that highly either, and I'll kind of show you some examples in a minute. And the kind of the software that I have found to be quite successful is the Capture One Express, which you get free with Fuji cameras. And then latterly, I've also bought a license for a piece of software called Iridient X Transformer. And as I said earlier, that's recently just been updated to version 2.01. And I've done a lot of playing around with it. And ultimately, I've decided for now just to revert back to my original 1.6.8 version, just because I found a better kind of group of settings which work, I think, better for my images when I choose to use Iridient X Transformer. But what I was going to do now is I was just going to kind of talk through my thoughts on those bits of software using kind of some real world kind of examples, so to speak, that I've kind of captured over the last few months with these cameras. You'll probably quickly see as well that I've rarely been able to improve the look of the kind of the image compared to the original JPEG that comes out of these Fuji cameras, which is a blessing and a curse really. It's great that you kind of, if you're so inclined, you don't need to do any editing, you can just use the images and go, kind of, so to speak. But if you do want to push them, it's a little bit frustrating, I find, that you don't get kind of a raw image that looks like the JPEG as a kind of your baseline to then work with. So we'll go over to the computer now and I'll talk through some of this in a bit more kind of detail. And you'll see as well that I just can't get the consistency with either Capture One or Iridient. Sometimes Capture One does a good job, other times Iridient does a better job, and other times I just choose just to stick with the original JPEG. It's just a shame that I haven't found anything out there that can kind of replicate how good the kind of JPEG comes out of the camera. So I think for later Fuji cameras, you can actually use some Fuji software on the computer, which is kind of like an extension to the kind of the in-camera RAW conversion software, and that does make it a lot easier to see it on like a screen and see the kind of the changes that those kind of options in camera kind of have on your image. And that is kind of like lacking for me a little bit using that kind of software in the camera. Yes, you can connect a cable to the monitor to see it in bigger, but you still can't see the kind of the changes. You kind of got to dial in your settings, create the kind of the JPEG, see it, and then decide whether that's what you want, or go back and then make some other changes. So it's not great for the kind of the older Fuji cameras, but I do think Fuji have kind of addressed that in later camera systems. Right, so I've showed this image before on another video that I've done for my channel, and it's one that I took up in London earlier in the year, and this is a prime example where no matter what software I tried to use, I couldn't get the resultant kind of file looking anywhere as close as the original JPEG. So for example, this is the original JPEG. This is what Lightroom horrendously does to the image. Then what I've got here is Capture One's attempt, but I've dialed in the kind of the linear response curve, which when you open the file in Capture One, let's have a look. This image, it's basically the export from the raw file in Capture One, and it's basically the generic V2 profile, and the curve, rather than leaving it on auto, I went through the options available to me and I settled on linear response. And then in Lightroom, all I've done is just kind of updated the exposure value just to kind of bring it up to what the kind of the original JPEG exposure was more kind of like. And as you can see here, so we talked about the Lightroom version being horrible. The Capture One Express is a lot better. So when you see the two outputs from Iridient, the Capture One effort is probably the closest to the JPEG, but still quite a long way away from what the actual Fuji straight out camera JPEG looks like. So talking about Iridient briefly, like I said, I did try the new version of Iridient and I played around with a lot of the settings. So here is kind of what the settings you get on the new program, and I kind of settled on these options for the RAW tab, and then similarly these settings for the kind of the DNG options. I must have spent a good proportion of the weekend just trying lots of different combinations just to see which one would produce the kind of the image which closely resembles the original JPEG. And of course they're far from it, but this was the best that I could do at the moment. It would be really helpful if Iridient provided some kind of preview ability in their software so that you can actually change all these settings and see in real time what the effect of those kind of changes does on the image. But as it is, you have to kind of commit the settings to an image, open it up and then see what it's like. So it's not that intuitive, but Iridient is a good software for me for my kind of workflow, because you can kind of just drag your files onto this kind of pop-up or open them within the kind of the software itself, and it'll kind of then convert them automatically to the settings that you've kind of dialed in. And it does save it as well quite handily to the original kind of folder that those JPEGs and RAF files are located. Whereas Capture One Express, you have to go in and select the kind of the folder you want the file to go into every single time. There's no kind of default, the original file's kind of location, which I find highly frustrating for such a kind of a modern piece of software. But anyway, that's how kind of Iridient works. And the good thing is you just drag and drop, like I said, onto the pop-up or open the files, and it converts them straight away with the settings you've dialed in. And then I just kind of import that into Lightroom, and that kind of fits better into my workflow than whereas Capture One, you've kind of got a few more steps to get to kind of import the raw files, apply the kind of the curve, the linear response curve, and then export them, find the location that you want them to go into, and then save. Whereas Iridient, yeah, I just find Iridient is a little bit more easier and slots into my Lightroom workflow a lot easier. So over the course of a couple of days, I found the kind of the settings that I like best with the new Iridient software. So the next image in my kind of Lightroom catalog here is the best that I could do with that new Iridient software. Yeah, and this is a really good image actually to show you why I kind of reverted back to the old Iridient X Transformer. So yeah, like I said, I played around with a lot of the settings. I came up with what I thought was kind of best, and in the end it didn't really reach the kind of the mark where I was with the old Iridient X Transformer software. So what I've done since installing the new version is actually roll back and go back to the older version, because at the moment for me I prefer the kind of the look that you get from that kind of older version. And the settings that I currently use, well, I say old, it's only about a year old. So whether they've tweaked things and just the kind of the way that images render now is a little bit different to this kind of older software. And for me at the moment, I prefer the look of this older kind of version. My raw file settings for the older Iridient is like that, and the same for the DNG options. Yeah, so back to the image. I've got over it newer images to show you in a minute, just briefly, but this one is a good example of why I've kind of gone back to the old Iridient. So this is the new Iridient. This is my old Iridient using my favorite settings. And on the face of it, you can't really see that much detail, but if you just kind of zoom in a little bit, so new Iridient on the left, old Iridient on the right. And if I just go into this particular area, you can kind of see there's a lot more kind of detail on the right hand side, the colour in the window, and to me it's just a little bit kind of sharper. I would say the only thing I find with the old Iridient is it is a little bit noisier. The new Iridient does look a little bit kind of cleaner, but in that process it's probably lost a little bit of the detail. So I'm happy at the moment to sacrifice a bit of kind of noise for a little bit better kind of clarity and kind of colour rendition. Yeah, so that's kind of why at the moment I'm sticking with the old Iridient. But hopefully from what you can see on this particular image, so this is the original JPEG, this is my old favourite Iridient, and this is the kind of the linear file with a bit of exposure compensation from Capture One Express. And in this particular example, it's quite rare, but I quite like the Capture One export for this particular image, just because the original JPEG is a little bit kind of harsh in reality, whereas the Capture One Express, it does kind of it just tones that kind of harshness down a little bit while kind of retaining the essence of this image. Right, so let's go on to another example. So this is an image that I took in Bath early in the year here in England, and it was a great scene. You've got these lovely old buildings, you've got this old kind of Jaguar car, and then also you've got this kind of man who's just about to walk around the corner here. So this is the kind of the original out of camera image. This is what Lightroom tries to do to it. So completely you lose that kind of warmth to the image, I'm going to say. Right, so then so that's the original JPEG. So now we're going to look at what Capture One does with it. Again, I've just lifted the exposure a little bit just to kind of bring it up, and you can see already compared to the Lightroom version that it's done a much better job of retaining those kind of highlights in the sky, as well as kind of the colours in the kind of the brickwork and the car. So again, then going on to look at Iridient, and this is the old Iridient. So again, you can probably see that the Capture One has done an amazing job, and I might have been a bit too hasty in buying a license for Iridient X Transformer, because when I've been doing the research for this video, I've actually been re-impressed how good a job Capture One does in the majority of cases. But as you'll see in a minute, there are examples when it doesn't do such a good job, and the Iridient X Transformer is a better option for some of those images. So like I was saying earlier in this video, there isn't one kind of software out there which provides that kind of consistency that you kind of need sometimes. So anyway, looking at the next image. So this one is an image of Sherborne House here in my kind of hometown of Sherborne. And I was really lucky here at capturing these two people walking by this kind of gateway, because really I was kind of just capturing the greens, because I'm still kind of not yet convinced on the greens that the Fuji cameras kind of produce. I'm slowly kind of coming around. So yeah, so this is the out camera JPEG, and you can see that the camera does an amazing job here. It's just got that kind of special look to it, you know, which is what I was kind of looking for when I bought these cameras. Right, so then let's have a look at how Lightroom butchers it. So there's Lightroom's take on this image, and you can kind of see already that it's kind of really, it's lost a lot of that kind of warmth and tonality and the kind of the colours. So I still prefer the JPEG at this point. Let's have a look at Capture One. So Capture One is quite a stark difference to what the original kind of JPEG looks like. I might actually do a compare here, so you can, so the original JPEG is on the left, and then Capture One is on the right, so you can kind of see the subtle kind of changes that it's kind of made. even saying that it's done a pretty good job actually. It's just put probably a little bit more kind of saturation and vibrancy in these kind of trees. The sky colour has changed arguably to a more kind of natural kind of looking blue. So yeah, it's done a pretty good job there. So if we just go on now to what Iridient does with this. So that's the new Iridient, and then this one is my current favourite, the old Iridient. I'll just compare the Capture One with the Iridient straight on the left and the right. So I'd probably say that the Capture One is a little bit warmer, whereas the Iridient, I think, produces a more natural scene here. It doesn't, the trees aren't quite as green, and the sky again is a little bit more kind of a natural blue, rather than kind of like in Capture One is a bit of a purple tint to the file. And I think as well there's a bit more, yeah, it's very difficult. It looks like Capture One is a lot more kind of clear. I'd say there's a lot more kind of definition in the kind of the brickwork. And if I could just go back to the original JPEG again, see, this is why it's very difficult to just pick whether you're going to go stick with Capture One or Iridient, because they produce subtly different kind of baseline exports to work with. Yeah, so I think if I was picking the file to work with here, I think I would pick the Iridient one, just because I think the Capture One, it kind of, I'm not sure whether you can see it on the screen, but it just looks slightly odd. The kind of the colours start to bleed into each other a little bit, whereas I think with Iridient, you do gain a bit more kind of separation, even if it is kind of wildly different to the original kind of JPEG. So I think if I was going to push this file a little bit further, I would use the kind of the Iridient export is my baseline. So these 4 images, 2 of them, Capture One works really well. One of them, the kind of the old Iridient, works best for me. Let's see what the last kind of image is going to kind of show us. So this is probably one of my favourite images I've captured with my Fuji. It was when I've got my Fuji 35mm f1.4 and I went out for a play, as you do, and this was the image that I captured. Again, you can see Sherborne House in the background. This is its kind of boundary wall, and I just love this kind of shrub that was kind of growing out of it, and all the kind of the ode roots, I guess, and just the way that the kind of the different kind of textures and colours in the brickwork. And I just kind of love the separation in this image, and I think the out of camera JPEG is just absolutely amazing here, in my opinion. Just the kind of there's very little that looks that I would change about this image. So if we look at how Lightroom destroys it, it completely goes for a different kind of sky colour. So there's the original. Let's do a comparison again. So left is the original JPEG, right is the Lightroom. So you can see it's completely kind of cooler, I guess. It's cooled everything down. So then we'll move over to the linear response from Capture One, and you can see here that it hasn't really done that good of a job. It's kind of, again, it's lost that kind of that clean kind of separation the original kind of JPEG has produced, you know, and you can see the tones a little bit kind of flatter. Yes, the sky arguably looks a little bit kind of more natural blue, but you kind of lose a little bit of the warmth between the kind of the building. Yeah, you just lose a little bit more kind of warmth, I guess, in the image. Yeah, so now if we go on to the Iridient attempts. So this was with the new kind of Iridient, and you can see it's a little bit more kind of harsh, I guess is a word I'd probably use. And it's probably, even though it does have the advantage of being closer, probably in terms of producing that kind of separation between the subject and the other elements of an image. And you're probably not going to see much difference here, but this is the kind of my old kind of Iridient, which I prefer, because if I just come out there a minute and I'll just compare the two Iridients again. So you've got the new Iridient on the left, the best settings I've been able to achieve, and then the old kind of Iridient that I kind of currently use on the right. And the reason you can probably see it here a little bit on the right, is I do feel that it does extract a little bit better colour, the old version of Iridient. It just looks better. It does a much better job than the Capture One Express. You can see the drastic kind of changes there. It's just not as good, and it you just lose a little bit of that kind of pop in the image and kind of organic feel. Whereas I think with kind of the Iridient's kind of interpretation, you do kind of retain that kind of character from this image compared to the JPEG. But I think it's close. So that's back to the original JPEG, and that's kind of Iridient's kind of take. So I'd be quite happy to use the Iridient, the old Iridient export here if I wanted to kind of take this further. So I continue to be amazed at the quality of the JPEGs that comes out of these cameras, and that's kind of why I know I bought the X-E1, because it was cheaper than the X Pro one, but I just had to kind of try out the X Pro one for myself, because if it delivers a little bit better than what the X-E1 is capable of, then I wanted to kind of give that a shot to see whether that is the case. So expect to see a lot more videos looking at these two kind of cameras over the next few months. Yeah, so this is the old Iridient interface. That's the RAW options. This is the DNG kind of options that I've kind of settled on at the moment. Even though I'm happy to do another video looking at kind of the Iridient X Transformer kind of program and the different kind of settings and the effects that they have on the image. Certainly all the new software, because I've got the license covers both, but I think it's very kind of subjective, kind of the feel and look of an image, because I know there's lots of people out there that don't kind of like the look of the X-Trans1 sensor. They prefer kind of the later sensors. And likewise, you might have, when I've been flicking through the different kind of software's rendition of the Fuji RAF file, you might have preferred like Lightroom. I can't think why, because out of all the software I've used, I've never really liked what Lightroom, my version of Lightroom 5.7, does to those old RAF files. You'll probably think I'm being really picky with the kind of the new Iridient and the old Iridient changes. You might want that kind of cleaner image that the newer kind of Iridient seems to be able to kind of produce from the same kind of file, whereas for me again, it's very subjective, it's very subtle, but for me the older kind of rendering of the old Iridient X Transformer just seems to me to do a better job at the moment. But obviously I will kind of keep an eye on that to see whether the developer kind of changes things in the future. Even though I didn't get on with the new Iridient X Transformer software, there were a lot more options than the old version to kind of play with. They've kind of introduced a clarity selection, as well as introducing a kind of sharpening masking kind of selection as well. But I kind of played around with a little bit of that. But I just think in a way, I just want a clean kind of export from Iridient, because I think ultimately when you take it into kind of Lightroom Capture One, where you can see the kind of the changes you make to an image more in real time, that's much more powerful than trying to guess what these kind of settings are going to do to your kind of image. And for me, that's all I want from Iridient. I just want that kind of that baseline kind of file that I can then kind of push further if I want to in my kind of Lightroom or Capture One kind of, or Silver FX Pro software. Just one other pro probably of the new version of Iridient as well is you can actually save your settings. So you get a setting that you like the look of, you can save that. But then to get around that with the old kind of Iridient, like you just saw here, I just kind of took a screenshot of it and then just save that, and then that works just as well. So hopefully you can see from that kind of run through that there is software out there like Iridient and Capture One Express that you can get a kind of good baseline kind of export in order to work with in kind of post if you so desire, but just don't expect them to kind of match the kind of the essence and character of the kind of the original JPEG. And I'm kind of glad in a way that I do kind of like that out of camera JPEG, because it means I won't have to kind of use this software too much, because I'm generally kind of happy with the out of camera kind of JPEGs. And like I said at the very start, you can, even though you haven't got the same amount of information in the JPEG as you have in a RAW file, you still can make some kind of minor changes in post, and that's relatively straightforward to do. And because I haven't been able to get close to the JPEG, I've invariably just edited the JPEG, just tweaked it slightly, just to kind of get the kind of the final finished image that I'm kind of looking for. And I generally do just keep the hold of the kind of the raw files for any of the good kind of really strong JPEGs that I kind of capture, just in case in the future there is some software out there that kind of can match the kind of the quality of that original kind of Fuji JPEG. Yeah, so even though I found during my research for this video that Capture One does do a good job, I'm still kind of glad that I paid, I think it was only about £35 for an Iridient X Transformer license, because like I showed just running through those images, not one piece of software covers my particular needs, and in some instances Capture One does an awful job, like Lightroom, not as bad as Lightroom can't get much worse I feel for my RAW files, but I don't know whether that's different. Please tell me if you've got like a newer version of Lightroom, does that help with the kind of the original X-Trans1 sensor kind of files? And I know DxO's Photolab has now started supporting Fuji's X-Trans files, but unfortunately that doesn't quite extend down as low as kind of the X-E1 and the X Pro 1 of cameras, so that's certainly why I haven't really bothered upgrading to Photolab for the last couple of years. But yeah, I'd be really grateful if you've got like an Adobe subscription per se, whether it's worth kind of stumping up the kind of the £10 a month subscription cost to get access to those kind of important updates which might make a difference with how Adobe Lightroom processes those files. I would hope that the newer version of Lightroom is better than my version of Lightroom, which does a pretty abysmal job. Yeah, so I think that kind of covers off all the areas that I kind of wanted to talk about today. It would have been great to just say, yeah, get this and sort of sort out all your kind of raw processor needs. But as I found, one piece of software won't do that for you. But I do feel, since doing this kind of research for this video, that I'm definitely going to be looking at Capture One a little bit more than I kind of have done previously, even if it is a few more kind of steps in my workflow. But I'll probably just save it for those kind of really kind of 4 or 5 star kind of images that I really kind of want to kind of take further and do something with in kind of post. So yeah, as always, if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the box below. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.